They say a king's word is law. But what happens when that word destroys everything he loves? When Princess Imani spoke truth to power, her father cast her out like trash. She was 12 years old. Her crime? Telling the king he was wrong. But here's what the king didn't know. When you break a child's heart, sometimes you break the very earth beneath your feet. This is the story of a kingdom that died because of one man's pride. And the moment that same man had to crawl on his knees to beg forgiveness from the daughter he condemned. Stay till the end, because what happens will leave you speechless. The morning Princess Imani was cast out began with no birdsong. Even the creatures of the kingdom sensed something dark was unfolding. King Kwame stood rigid at the palace gates, his royal robes heavy with gold thread, his crown catching the first rays of a sun that seemed reluctant to rise. Beside him stood Queen Zara, her face a mask of stone, though her hands trembled at her sides. Imani was only 12 years old. Her crime? She had spoken against her father's decision to seize land from the farmers who fed the kingdom. In the throne room, before the Council of Elders, she had dared to say, "A king who starves his people is no king at all." The words had echoed through the marble halls. The elders had gasped. The king's face had turned to thunder. Now, as dawn broke over the kingdom of Ashanti, Imani stood before the gates with nothing but the thin dress on her back. Her eyes, once bright with youth and hope, were swollen from a night of tears. She looked up at her father one final time, searching for a flicker of mercy in his face. "Please, father," she whispered. "I only spoke the truth." King Kwame's jaw clenched. "You spoke treason. No child of mine questions my rule. You are no longer my daughter. You are no longer a princess. You are nothing." Queen Zara turned her face away, unable to watch. She had begged her husband through the night to reconsider, but his pride was a fortress no plea could breach. The gates groaned open. 2 guards stepped forward, their faces grim. They did not touch Imani, they didn't need to. The message was clear. Go, and never return. Imani took her first step into exile. Then another. Her tears fell onto the dusty road, each drop disappearing into the earth like prayers into an indifferent sky. She did not look back. What was there to see? A father who valued power over love? A mother too afraid to stand against him? A palace built on injustice? As she walked, the wind picked up, swirling dust around her feet. The sky, which had been clear moments before, began to darken with strange clouds. But Imani didn't notice. She was already gone, a ghost walking away from the only life she'd ever known. Behind her, the gates slammed shut with the finality of a tomb being sealed. King Kwame watched from his window as his daughter's small figure disappeared into the horizon. For just a moment, his resolve wavered. But then he remembered the laughter of the elders, the whispers of weakness if he showed mercy. He turned away from the window, convincing himself he had done what was necessary. What the king didn't see was the earth where Imani's tears had fallen. Small cracks appeared in the ground, spreading like veins. The soil, once rich and dark, began to pale. The grass that had been green that morning turned brown before noon. By sunset, the flowers in the palace garden had withered to dust. Imani walked for 3 days. She drank from streams and ate berries from bushes. At night, she slept under trees, her tears never stopping. Each tear that touched the ground seemed to pull something from it. Where she walked, footprints remained not as impressions in soil, but as patches of barren earth that refused to heal. On the 3rd night, exhausted and heartbroken, Imani collapsed beside a dying river. She looked up at the stars, the same stars she used to watch from her palace balcony with her mother. "Why?" she cried out to the universe. "Why does speaking truth bring such punishment?" The stars offered no answer. But deep in the earth, something stirred. Something ancient. Something that had been sleeping for generations, waiting for tears pure enough to awaken it. Imani didn't know it yet, but her pain was changing everything. Oh wow! A 12-year-old princess banished for speaking the truth. And her own father won't even look at her. If this is breaking your heart, Smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inayah. Drop a comment. Was the king right to value his pride over his daughter? Or is this the biggest mistake he'll ever make? What happened next reveals how Imani's tears are already changing the kingdom, and it's devastating. 3 months after Imani's exile, the kingdom of Ashanti began to die. It started with the wells. One by one, they ran dry. Farmers lowered their buckets deeper and deeper, but drew up only dust. The great Volta River, which had flowed through the kingdom for 1,000 years, slowed to a trickle. Fish floated dead on the surface. Crocodiles abandoned their banks and wandered inland, desperate and dangerous. King Kwame called his advisors to the throne room. "This is a natural drought," he declared. "It will pass. Double the taxes on the remaining water. We must preserve resources for the palace." The advisors exchanged worried glances but said nothing. They remembered what happened to the last person who questioned the king. But this was no natural drought. Every farmer who touched their soil felt it. The earth was angry. Seeds planted with hope sprouted twisted and black. Crops that managed to grow were bitter and poisonous. Animals that grazed on the remaining grass fell sick and died. The kingdom that had once been the breadbasket of the region became a wasteland. Queen Zara tried to maintain order, but even she could feel something was wrong. She began having dreams of Imani, standing in a desert, crying tears that turned to sand. She would wake gasping, clutching her chest, whispering her daughter's name. "We should send someone to find her," Queen Zara said one night to her husband. "Bring her home." "She made her choice," King Kwame replied coldly. But he didn't meet his wife's eyes. 6 months into the drought, people began to leave. Entire villages packed what little they could carry and headed to neighboring kingdoms. Those who stayed grew gaunt and desperate. Children cried with hunger. Elders who had lived through wars and famines said they had never seen anything like this. The king refused to acknowledge the connection. But others saw it clearly. The oldest woman in the kingdom, Mother Naomi, stood in the market square and proclaimed, "The land weeps for the princess. We cast out innocence, and now innocence has cast us out." Guards arrested her for sedition. But her words spread like wildfire. People whispered them in their homes, in the dead of night, when fear and hunger made them brave. Meanwhile, far from the kingdom, Imani had found refuge in a village at the edge of the desert. An old woman named Mama Sarah had taken her in, asking no questions, demanding no explanations. The village was small and poor, but the people were kind. They shared what little they had. But even here, Imani's presence brought strange effects. On days when she was happy, helping Mama Sarah cook or playing with the village children, rain would fall, just over their village, nowhere else. On days when her grief overwhelmed her, when she remembered her father's cold eyes and her mother's silence, the sun would beat down mercilessly and dust devils would dance through the streets. Mama Sarah noticed these patterns. She was wise in the old ways, the ways before kings and kingdoms, when the earth and the people spoke the same language. "Child," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, "do you know what you carry?" Imani looked up, confused. "I carry nothing. I lost everything." "No," Mama Sarah shook her head. "You carry the weight of injustice. And injustice is the heaviest burden in this world. Heavy enough to bend the sky. Heavy enough to crack the earth." Imani didn't understand. She was just a girl. Just a castaway. Just someone trying to survive each day. But back in Ashanti, King Kwame was beginning to understand. As he stood on his balcony, looking out over fields of dead crops and empty riverbeds, a terrible truth crept into his heart. He tried to push it away, tried to blame anything else. But it persisted, growing stronger each day. His kingdom wasn't dying because of bad weather or bad luck. It was dying because he had broken something sacred. He had chosen pride over love, power over truth, cruelty over mercy. And now, the very land was rejecting him. 1 year after Imani's exile, King Kwame's throne room was a shadow of its former glory. The gold had been sold to buy food. The tapestries had been traded for water. Even the crown itself had lost its luster, as if the jewels knew they sat upon an unworthy head. The king himself had changed. His face, once full and proud, was gaunt. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, were haunted. He barely slept. When he did, he dreamed of his daughter's tears soaking into the earth, and the earth opening up to swallow him whole. Queen Zara was sick. The palace healers said it was her heart, broken by grief and guilt. She lay in her chambers, whispering Imani's name, begging forgiveness from the air. The final blow came on a day when the sky turned red. Not the red of sunset, but the deep crimson of blood. The remaining citizens of Ashanti looked up in terror. Even the king, stubborn as stone, felt fear. Mother Naomi's successor, a young prophet named Joshua, stood at the palace gates and spoke with a voice that carried across the dying kingdom. The land has spoken. The sky has spoken. Send the king to seek the one he wronged, or let the kingdom die completely. For the first time in his reign, King Kwame heard something he had never heard before. His people, unified in their demand. Send the king. Let him face what he's done. Save us or go yourself. That night, alone in his throne room, King Kwame made a decision. He would go. Not because he believed in curses or prophecies. Not because he thought finding Imani would solve anything. But because he had nothing left to lose. His kingdom was dead. His wife was dying. His legacy was dust. He left at dawn, telling no one. He wore simple clothes, a farmer's tunic, worn sandals. He carried no supplies, no money, no guards. For the first time in his life, he was just a man. The journey was brutal. King Kwame had never walked more than from his chambers to his throne. His feet blistered within hours. His back ached. The sun, which he had once commanded from the shade of his balcony, now beat down on him without mercy. He asked for directions in every village, every town. Have you seen a young woman, about 13 now, traveling alone? Most people ignored him. Some laughed. Some spat at his feet. In one village, they recognized him despite his disguise. You're the king, an old man shouted. The king who cast out his daughter. A crowd gathered, angry and starving. They threw stones. King Kwame ran, bleeding and humiliated, into the wilderness. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. The king ate roots and insects. He drank from puddles. He slept on bare ground, shivering in the cold, burning in the heat. Every step was agony. But he kept walking. He didn't know exactly what drove him forward. Maybe it was survival instinct. Maybe it was guilt finally breaking through his pride. Maybe it was the memory of Imani as a little girl, climbing into his lap, calling him Papa with such trust and love. One night, delirious with thirst and exhaustion, he collapsed in the sand. He looked up at the stars, the same stars Imani had looked at on her third night of exile. I'm sorry, he whispered to the universe. I'm sorry. It was the first time he had said those words in his entire life. Far away, in the village at the desert's edge, Imani woke suddenly from a dream. In it, she had seen her father, broken and barefoot, calling her name. She rose and walked outside. The night was clear. The stars were bright. And somewhere, deep in her heart, she felt something shift. The anger that had burned there for so long flickered, just for a moment. King Kwame found Mama Sarah's village on a day when the world seemed to hold its breath. He collapsed at the well in the center of the village, his body finally giving out after 6 months of walking. Children ran to get adults. Women brought water. A man helped him into the shade. The king, who had once commanded thousands, now relied on the kindness of strangers who didn't even know his name. There's a girl, he rasped through cracked lips. Princess Imani. Is she here? The villagers exchanged glances. They knew Imani, but they knew her as simply Imani, a quiet girl who helped Mama Sarah and played with the children. They didn't know she was a princess. Who's asking? Mama Sarah appeared, her wise old eyes studying the broken man before her. Her father. The words came out like a confession. I'm her father, and I need to see her. Mama Sarah's expression didn't change. She had suspected, of course. Imani's pain was too deep to be ordinary. And now here was its source, broken and begging at her doorstep. Wait here, she said. She found Imani in the garden, tending to the vegetables that somehow grew lush and green when she was near them. The girl had grown in the past year and a half. She was taller, stronger. But her eyes still carried that deep sadness. Child, Mama Sarah said gently. Someone is here to see you. Imani looked up. Who? Your father. The watering can fell from Imani's hands. For a long moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then, slowly she stood. I don't want to see him. I know. But perhaps you need to. Imani walked to the village well, her feet heavy as stones. And there he was. The man who had been larger than life, who had seemed made of marble and gold, now looked like any other starving traveler. His face was weathered. His hands were calloused and bleeding. His eyes, when they met hers, were full of tears. Imani, he whispered. She said nothing. She simply stood there, this girl who had become something more than a girl, something connected to the earth and sky in ways that defied explanation. King Kwame fell to his knees. The man who had never bowed to anyone now prostrated himself in the dust before his daughter. I was wrong, he said. I was so terribly wrong. I chose my pride over you. I chose power over truth. I cast you out for being brave enough to speak what I was too cowardly to hear. The villagers had gathered now, watching this strange scene unfold. I don't expect forgiveness, the king continued, his voice breaking. I don't deserve it. But the kingdom is dying. The people are suffering. Not because of you, but because of me. Because I broke something sacred when I broke your heart. Imani felt something crack inside her chest. All the anger she had carried, all the pain, it was still there. But now something else was there too. Seeing her father like this, truly humble for the first time in his life, she saw not the king who had banished her, but the man who had once carried her on his shoulders and called her his little moon. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you throw me away? King Kwame looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I admitted you were right, the elders would see me as weak. Afraid that if I showed mercy, I would lose respect. I thought being a king meant never admitting mistakes. I was wrong. A real king protects the truth, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Imani felt tears coming to her own eyes. For the first time since her exile, these tears were not born purely of grief. They were something more complex, grief and anger and, surprisingly, a small seed of compassion. The land is dying because you broke a sacred bond, Imani said. When you cast me out, you cast out justice itself. And without justice, nothing can grow. I know, the king said. I understand now. But how do I fix it? What can I do? Imani looked at her father, then at Mama Sarah, then at the villagers who had shown her more kindness than her own blood. She looked up at the sky, which was beginning to shift, clouds gathering for the first time in over a year. You can't fix it, she said finally. Not alone. But maybe we can fix it together. The journey back to Ashanti took 2 weeks. Father and daughter walked side by side, but the silence between them was thick as fog. Imani had agreed to return, but her heart was still guarded, still wounded. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't heal with a few tears and apologies. King Kwame didn't push. He simply walked, carrying water for his daughter, finding food where he could, accepting without complaint when she chose to sleep far from him at night. This was his penance, and he bore it without protest. As they traveled, something strange happened. Behind them, where Imani's footsteps fell, tiny green shoots began to push through the dead earth. It was subtle at first, a blade of grass here, a small flower there. But as they continued, the trail of life grew more pronounced. "Do you see it?" King Kwame asked one evening, looking back at the path they had walked. "I see it," Imani replied quietly. "But it's not me. Not just me. It's us. When injustice walked this land, everything died. When we walk together, the wrong and the wronged, moving toward reconciliation, life returns." The king nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. The curse had never been about magic or supernatural punishment. It was about balance. About what happens when leaders choose cruelty over compassion, when families break sacred bonds, when truth is punished instead of celebrated. When they reached the border of Ashanti, people came running. Word had spread that the king had gone searching for his daughter. Now, seeing them return together, the remaining citizens wept. Queen Zara emerged from the palace, leaning heavily on her attendants. When she saw her daughter, she collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "Forgive me," she cried. "I should have fought for you. I should have stood against him. I was a coward, and I have lived in agony every day since you left." Imani looked at her mother, this woman who had been silent when silence was the worst betrayal. The anger was still there, but so was something else. Her mother looked small, broken, genuinely transformed by grief. "Forgiveness is a process, Mama," Imani said softly. "Not a moment. But I'm here. That's a start." The three of them stood together in the palace courtyard. And then, as if the sky had been waiting for this exact moment, the first drops of rain began to fall. It was tentative at first, a sprinkle, gentle and uncertain. But as King Kwame raised his face to the sky, as Queen Zara reached for her daughter's hand, as Imani allowed herself to cry tears of something other than pure sorrow, the rain increased. It poured. It flooded. It soaked the dead earth and breathed life back into it. The people of Ashanti danced in the streets, crying and laughing, letting the water wash away months of despair. That evening, King Kwame stood before what remained of his people and did something no king of Ashanti had ever done. He removed his crown and set it at his daughter's feet. "I am not worthy to rule," he declared. "I nearly destroyed us all because I couldn't admit when I was wrong. But Princess Imani, she had the courage I lacked. She spoke truth to power when it would have been easier to stay silent. And when I came to her, broken and begging, she chose mercy over vengeance." He turned to Imani. "I don't ask for my crown back. I ask only to serve you and help rebuild what I destroyed." Imani picked up the crown. It was heavy, heavier than she expected. She looked at it for a long moment, then handed it back to her father. "We rebuild together," she said. "Not as king and subject. Not even as father and daughter. But as two people who learned the same hard lesson. You learned that power without humility is destruction. I learned that pain without purpose is poison. Together, we'll teach this kingdom something new." "What's that?" the king asked. "That the strongest foundation isn't built on gold or armies or even ancient bloodlines. It's built on truth, justice, and the courage to make things right when they go wrong." The rain continued through the night and into the next day. Seeds began to sprout. Rivers filled. The land, which had seemed dead beyond recovery, began to heal. It wasn't instant. It wasn't perfect. Crops took time to grow. Trust took time to rebuild. Imani had nightmares for years about being cast out. King Kwame had to face daily reminders of his failure. Queen Zara had to earn back her daughter's trust one day at a time. But they did it. Together. Years later, Ashanti became known not as the kingdom that nearly died, but as the kingdom that learned to value truth over pride. Under the guidance of both father and daughter, now ruling as equals, they created new laws. Anyone, no matter how young or lowly, could speak in council. Dissent was encouraged, not punished. Mistakes were acknowledged and corrected, not hidden and denied. And every year, on the anniversary of Imani's exile, the kingdom held a festival. Not a celebration, but a remembrance. They remembered the tears that fell on dusty roads. They remembered the crops that died and the people who left. They remembered because healing requires remembering. Justice requires acknowledging the wounds before binding them. On the 20th anniversary, an old Mama Sarah visited the kingdom. She found Imani, now a grown woman, standing in the rain, for the rain came more often now, gentle and nurturing. "You did well, child," Mama Sarah said. "You turned pain into purpose." Imani smiled, though her eyes were wet with tears. "I had good teachers. You taught me that kindness is stronger than anger. My father taught me, eventually, that humility is stronger than pride." "And what will you teach?" Mama Sarah asked. Imani looked out over her kingdom, vibrant, alive, flawed but honest. "I'll teach that breaking is not the end. Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt properly. My father and I broke each other. The kingdom broke. But from those broken pieces, we built something stronger." That night, it rained again. But these were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of healing, of growing, of a land and a people who had learned the hardest lesson, that justice and mercy, truth and love, must walk hand in hand, or nothing truly grows. Wow. Did that ending hit different? A kingdom reborn from broken pieces. A father and daughter rebuilding together. If this story touched your heart, smash that like button and subscribe to Folktales by Inayah. Drop a comment. What's the biggest lesson you learned from Imani and her father's story? These folktales carry wisdom we all need. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story.